Over the past few years, you've been hearing more and more about athletes dying, dropping dead. And the big question in everybody's mind is it because of the elephant in the room? So the first question is, are you just having ideas in your head? Is this what we call confirmation bias, where because you're seeing news reports about it, you seem to think that you're seeing it more often than it is really happening? Well, guess what? There is now a paper that was just published in February of 2025 looking at sudden cardiac arrests in the United States among young and competitive athletes before and during the COVID pandemic. Now, if you look just at the surface of that paper, they will tell you that effectively what you have got is confirmation bias. It's not real. You just think it's real because you are looking for it. It's kind of like when you have a red car and suddenly you see every red car on the street. It's that kind of thing that they're saying. Should we interrogate the paper any further? Or should we, as many people are doing nowadays, just accept what you're told and realize that it's just in your head? No need to worry. Well, if you are here, you should know that I'm going to take a closer look at this because my instinct is that at least we knew that there are two things that can cause inflammation in the heart. One is infection, and the other one is the elephant. What are the chances that you actually have a better outcome through the pandemic? But it's a bit more complicated than that. And so I'll share with you my thoughts, and you can analyze that and reflect on it as you will. So let's get back to the basics. What really are we talking about? And this is the paper. As I said, sudden cardiac arrest among young competitive athletes before and during the COVID pandemic. Okay. Um, they highlighted here social media reports insinuated that COVID 19 illness or mRNA vaccines caused an increase in sudden cardiac arrest or sudden cardiac death in athletes. I think they shouldn't have put that in there because suddenly this question about during the COVID 19 pandemic is no longer relevant because they are insinuating here that it is confirmation bias that caused them to look at this in some detail. So let's clarify our definitions. So, what is sudden cardiac death? SCA. It's defined as an unexpected collapse. Okay, so a young athlete suddenly collapse in which they have to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation, they're jumping on their chest, and or defibrillation, that means they put a shock where it was provided in an individual who survived. So sudden cardiac arrest is if they survived versus sudden cardiac death is defined as a sudden unexpected death due to a cardiac cause or a structurally normal heart with no other explanation for death and a history consistent with cardiac related death. So it's two things: cardiac arrest, the one that you may see somebody collapse on the screen, or death where they have just died suddenly. Okay. And this is what a lot of people have been saying has been happening more often. And yes, you can imagine the news media has been emphasizing it. But it's a very important question to clarify, to try and indicate to the population that actually this is not a major issue. Now, this is where my problem comes because, as I said, when I looked carefully at the paper, something struck me as unusual. And I'll show you what it is here. They looked at a period of time from January 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2022. Straight away, that's a red flag for me Because I know that when we look at the pandemic period in 2020, when you had lockdowns and the like, that's not a good point to use because people weren't doing their normal activities. And my feeling is that if you're going to study that, and if you specifically want to exclude the association with the elephant, you shouldn't use 2020. This is the problem, is that straight away they have a bias. I can sense it straight away. They are trying to prove that you are wrong as opposed to objectively looking at the data. That's the first red flag. Now, where they get their data from, and we're going to touch on this and then come back to the paper and then touch on this again. So, the first thing you have to know is that their data is coming from the National Center for Catastrophic Sport Injury Research. And this area, this bit of information is quite important to understand. They have been looking and monitoring this kind of pattern for a long time, over many years. And it's not just sudden cardiac death, it's injuries, it's fatalities. And they regularly put out publications as well as data looking at all these things. So this is where they got the data from to identify any patterns that were relevant in the context of these sudden cardiac deaths. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Let's just go back to the paper. As I said, I highlighted the time frame, and I'm thinking that's not right. Okay, so let's look carefully at what it is that they saw. So when you look at the paper here, and this is in the figure, the pre-pandemic period, 2017, 2018, 2019, and then the pandemic period, 2020, 2021, 2022. You then have to look, sudden cardiac death, SCD, is creamish yellow, and blue is sudden cardiac arrest. And over this period here, it was about 203. And in this period here, it was 184. And so the conclusion is that there is no problem with regards to the elephant in the room. And as I say, if you take it at surface value, you will walk away from that thinking that this is just confirmation bias. Now, I'm not saying that there is specifically a problem, but I know that there is a red flag in the data. As I said, quite simply, if you are looking, and they specified this, they said this in the paper, they were trying to discount that association people had with the elephant. So if you are specifically looking for that, you then definitely have to specifically pick a time frame when it was relevant. And it wasn't 2020. Actually, it was mid to late 2021 after they rolled out the elephants to the population that they started targeting younger people who didn't have any comorbidities. So this is actually a really important question. Did they put them at unnecessary risk? So you have to then pick the time frame. As I said here, if you're going to compare it, the pre-pandemic should be compared from the midpoint of 2021 to the midpoint of 2023, at least. Or you could have used 21, 22, and 2023, not 2020. So if you are trying to clarify that, this alone throws a spanner in the works. And that's a problem. So there's more that I want to look at, because you have to look carefully at the numbers. So as I said, the period of time of 2017 to 2019 was 203 deaths, sudden cardiac arrest or sudden cardiac death. And the period from 2020 to 2022 was 184. So it is less than the first period. So on the surface, it looks, yep, there is no issue. This is all in your head. You have confirmation bias. But let's break this down a little bit further. So as I showed you, there are a number of publications that were there on that site. And one of them here is the etiology of sudden cardiac arrest and death in competitive athletes, a 2-year prospective surveillance study. So they were again looking over a similar kind of time period between 2014 and 2016. And what is very clear when you look at the results here is this was 179 cases. So 179 cases over a 3-year period, 184 cases from 2020 to 2022. Why was it 203 in that other period? And this is now where you realize that actually the outlier is 2017. This was much higher than normal for whatever reason. And so actually the trend is about 179 to about 180. This would appear on the surface to be just about in the trend. But again, you have to look deeper. So, as I said, if you're coming on this journey with me, these are just my questions. I can't guarantee what I'm saying. I'm just telling you what I'm looking at and what I'm analyzing. So when you look carefully at the paper, this paper was accepted for publication on the 18th of December 2024, and it was published in February of 2025. Now, what it means is that the authors were still working on the paper up to, say, November of 2024. Now, there's a reason why I highlight this date, because if you are publishing that, and as I said, if you are specifically looking to try and disregard the elephant in the room, you definitely would want to see 2023. So 2024, December or November 2024, they would have, in theory, time to look at the data from 2023. Why was that not done? Here is where it gets really interesting. There is no published data for 2023. So I have looked through the history and the timeline with regards to NCSSIR. If anybody has contact with them, I don't have the time to go and dig this up. So somebody may be interested. They normally publish their annual reports, and this is what it would look like, their annual reports on football injuries and so on. And this is what they use, not this report, but a similar report, which is not allowed to be published, broadcast, or rewritten without permission. But these annual reports are published usually by about April of the year after. So they published for 2022 in April of 2023. So one would expect that the data for 2023 should be published by April of 2024. I can't find the data. Now, that may just be a coincidence, and I would presume that the authors should have been asking them, well, where is the data for 2023? Because a more appropriate selection of time is actually 2021 to 2023 if you are, as they said in the paper, remember, I didn't make this up. This is exactly what they said in the paper, just so that you remember. They said there was an insinuation about COVID illness or mRNA vaccines. Now, this is really the insinuation that people had caused an increase in this. So if you are looking for that, you definitely need the 2023 data. So, when you actually look carefully, again, this is a final point, just for you to reflect on what I'm looking at. When you look carefully at the numbers, then, if the trend is about 179 to 180, for 2021, for 2020, it was 50 deaths. For 2021, it was 67. For 2022, it was 67. In order to start having a statistically significant increase for 2023, it just needs to be about over 70. And then 2021, 2020, 2022 suddenly has a statistically relevant increase over the previous years. That would have been inconvenient, wouldn't it? I don't know. All I can say is that I don't like it when these research papers come out where they're not really looking to try and identify a problem. They are trying to disregard the concern. That's not good science. And true, we have to be careful of confirmational bias where we expect a problem and so we are looking for a problem. And yeah, I probably could fall into that category of expecting to see a problem. And so, yeah, I am looking at the data to confirm what it is that I expect to see. But that's raw data as opposed to just a perception. And so, in that sense, what we have is a situation where sadly, it feels like a dishonesty with regards to science and scientific exploration. There really doesn't seem to be a real intention to get to the bottom of things and to genuinely understand things. And so, because I know they're taking that paper and they are going to be pushing it in front of your face, if anyone says, well, actually, I've been seeing more deaths, they're going to push that paper in front of your face and say, no, you haven't. It's a confirmational bias. You don't know what you're talking about. Now that you're educated, you can now tell them, well, actually, you haven't looked at the wrong period. You've been looking at the wrong period in order to properly exclude that as a mechanism. This is just the reality of where we are. Listen, if there is a problem, there is going to be no place to hide. We are going to see it at some point. But I don't mind being wrong on this because, in the end, lives are at stake. Have a great evening.